You're tuning into the Active Mom Podcast with physical therapist, Dr. Carrie Pagliano, a real mom's guide to all things postpartum return to workouts after baby. If you're a postpartum mom, coach, trainer, or physical therapist looking for answers on how to get back to running, CrossFit, yoga, Pilates, HIIT, you name it, without the fear of pelvic floor issues or doing something wrong, this is the podcast for you. Let's start the show. I ran across our first guest as a co-author in a couple of books that you guys may have heard of, Roar and Next Level. And then as I started drinking from the menopause fire hose this year, totally dove into Feisty Menopause and the Hit Play Not Pause podcast. So I reached out and Selene graciously said yes. So Selene Yeager, welcome to the Active Mom Postpartum Podcast.
I'm very happy to be here. How are you, Carrie?
Good. Thanks so much for being on. Tell us a little bit about who you are, where you're from, what's your jam?
It depends on the day, literally who I am and what I'm doing. But I am a writer by trade. I have been for 30 years, health, fitness, science writer. I also was a semi-professional mountain bike racer for many years. I've done triathlon, a lot of sports. So I've also been a coach, a trainer, a nutrition coach. And now I'm also a menopause coach. So I just keep dragging everything along in my life. So that's how I sort of got into this space. I have a really deep background in writing about health and fitness and women's health and endurance sports and strength training. So it all just came together. And when I hit menopause myself, I found that there was nothing for active women out there. I started what the hell is happening? And all the advice was you should exercise. I was check. Okay, now what?
Right.
So Dr. Stacy Sims and I saw a glaring need for a book on menopause. Feisty saw a need for a whole brand on menopause. And I was we should do a podcast or go for it. So here we are.
I love it. I love it. We were just talking before we hit play or record here. Sorry, I'm getting all caught up with your fabulous name of your podcast. About you've kind of had this front row seat since when Roar came out about talking about just female athlete nutrition, lifting, exercising, all that stuff, and just watching more women be in the athlete space. When you look back, I mean, it wasn't that long ago. What was Roar came out in 2016? What do you think when you look in the rear view, other than what the hell was that wave?
It's wild. It's wild. Well, what's really funny is that when Roar did came out in 2016, and I very rarely do I look at a book and go, this is going to be a true game changer, right? But I looked at this and I knew her work and I was this is going to change things. And it went out and it did okay.
Mm-hmm.
But we didn't have, at the time, the publisher publishing in general it continues to be in turmoil, but it was in real turmoil. So the book never got the publicity, push that it needed. And Stacy's a scientist. She had 200 followers on Twitter or something. So it did okay. And then it just sort of dropped off. And I'll tell you, she hired, Feisty used to have an agency arm, and she brought them in. And all of a sudden, once the book got into people's hands, the movement really, and then social media had grown and Instagram had grown. And I was whoa, okay, here we go. And now I look and the same thing is happening with menopause, even since 2020, when I started talking on my podcast about it. Wow, what a giant wave of it's just it's a massive, massive wave now. I mean, I knew it was going to be a wave. I told you, before you hit record, I felt I was sort of bobbing in the ocean with my surfboard going, oh, here comes one. I'll just jump on. And now I'm just okay, I don't know. Hold on.
And I don't know if it's the algorithm or the fact that I dove headfirst into this this past fall, but I feel there's so much out, even just in the last year. That it's just and even mainstream media, and I think a lot has to do with going back and looking at WHI and kind of all that stuff, and people really rethinking HRT and kind of bobbing along. Where did you feel all of a sudden everybody is talking about menopause?
It didn't take too long, you know, in 2020, it was funny because I was actually like, okay, I'm gonna say menopause and people are gonna get freaked out. And people, you know, people kind of did, and I was a little freaked out and it was a little weird. But then you had very quickly it became evident that this is a huge demographic of women, right?
Yeah.
And they are in positions of power. So you had Oprah, like
Yep.
bang down that door. And then you have Drew Barrymore's, and you have celebrities, and you have Halle, you
Yeah.
know, like it didn't take long. And then
Yep.
once that happens, forget it. Like everybody's like, oh, look, there's money, you know?
Yeah.
So it's, yeah, there's no
I
stopping it now.
and I love the fact and I see so many parallels in kind of like the pregnancy postpartum space is like nobody's talking about it, nobody's talking about quiet, and then all of a sudden one person
Yep.
talks about it, and then
Yep.
all of a sudden the gates fly open and the myths get busted and all that kind of stuff. When you
And
were
why
kind
did
of
it take so long? I'm
oh
sorry, I didn't mean
girl.
to jump on you, but
No,
like,
you're I've
you
been
know,
doing
I
this
mean,
for
I
25
remember,
years, so yeah.
right? I remember having my daughter and being like, I don't remember reading about this in the books. Like all the stuff that
No.
happens. I'm just like, what is happening and why
No.
don't we know? And I joke all the time that I should call my podcast, Why Don't We Know This? Because everybody comes on and like,
Right?
why didn't I know this? But
So
anyway, you were gonna ask a
no,
question.
but I think that's a really valid point because your daughter's 20?
21.
21. Okay. Congrats, by the way. You made it that far. Well done, mom.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks. It's a journey. It doesn't always get easier.
No, I have a 10-year-old fifth grader and a just turned 13-year-old seventh grader. So we're in
You're
the
in
fun
it.
stuff again. Yes, exactly. Exactly. But no, that's a conversation I've actually found myself having a lot is um especially actually in the perimenopause and menopause space, because a lot of the things that I am treating kind of with early postpartum right now, these perimenopausal and menopausal moms didn't get it. I'm like, if you are our vintage, we didn't know this shit back then.
Yeah.
We know it and treat it very differently now. And I almost feel like I need to go back and do like a cliff notes to get everybody caught up, because issues like leakage pain, kind of all this stuff that maybe kept them from being active or they just suffered through, they're still suffering through. By the way,
Right.
throw in some extra, hormonal chaos
Yep.
and then, mass explosion. So, I mean, for you, kind of what was a quick overview of kind of your postpartum experience being an athlete and then going headlong into menopause?
Yeah, I mean, I did, it's interesting because I had my daughter at 32, so I wasn't sort of in that space yet.
Mhm.
I didn't, and I feel like that's part of the reason why the conversation hasn't caught up because so many women are having children later now,
Yes.
39, early
Yeah.
40s, like,
Yep.
and nothing has caught up to that. We have just not like
Mhm.
the conversation has not caught up to that where postpartum meets perimenopause, and it
No.
really needs to catch up, like,
Yeah.
quick. It needs to catch up.
Yeah.
But, so I knew I will tell you when I was pregnant with my daughter, the first 3 months were very, very difficult. I had a lot of suicidal ideation. Like, I was
Mm.
never worried about myself, but I
Yeah.
was like, "Holy shit, this is dark." I mean, I was just,
Wow.
like, thinking about driving my car into trees and all kinds of stuff, and nobody wants to talk about that, right?
No.
Like, when people say, "Oh, congrats, how are you?" Nobody wants to hear like, "Well, let me tell you how it really feels inside my
Yeah.
head," when I wake up, so you feel very alone in that, and I'm so
Yep.
glad people are talking about that more now.
Yes.
But then, like, once she was born, like, literally the moment she was born, it felt like Dorothy opened the door and has landed in Oz. Like the world got technicolor and I was deliriously happy. And I thought,
Wow.
thank God it wasn't the other way around because I had so much
Yeah.
empathy for women who flip that script and
Yep.
feel that hormonal terrible darkness,
Yeah.
when they have a baby. My God. I mean, it gave me just such the whole experience. I was like, whoa.
Yeah.
So you take that and then you take, flat, then go forward in another, I hit perimenopause not really knowing that I was in perimenopause
Yeah.
because again, we didn't talk about stuff like anxiety, which I never knew
Right.
was part of that picture.
Yep.
You hear, like, when I wrote for Prevention a million years ago and was writing about these things, even perimenopause, they were talking about that, to their credit, a long time ago. But the focus was always on the menopause, which is a word I hate and despise to this day. Like, like your belly. It was always on weight, right? And hot
Yeah.
flashes. And so when I was just like waking up at 2 a.m. feeling like the world was crashing down around me, I'm like, well, Celine's finally come undone. I was just
Right.
like, and I was training at a very high level. I was racing all over the world on my mountain bike, and everything was going very well, except that psychological stuff. It was very hard to sort of stay on top of it.
Yeah.
And I wish I had just known, because once I knew, and that years later when I started studying this, I'm like, if I had just
Oh,
known it, it would have turned down the temperature on it. Because then when you
yeah.
don't know what's causing this kind of feeling, it's very unnerving,
It
right? And you
adds
don't
to
even
it.
know how to attack it. 100%. It
Yeah.
exacerbates it. So I
Yep.
think just having that knowledge, and if you're a woman who is coming postpartum with that, I mean, because all of this is a result of all these giant hormonal fluctuations,
Yep.
right? Um, if you're a woman that's just coming out of like that postpartum period, and however your hormones are reacting and you're responding to that, if you start layering in the beginnings of the menopause transition, there's a lot of hormonal chaos there,
Yeah.
and it would be very hard to tease. And to your point, what is what? Because a lot of times women in perimenopause start leaking urine, right? I mean,
Right.
it's because the tissues are drying, and it's different reasons, and they get mished.
Right.
Like there's
Yeah.
different stuff going on, and
Yep.
that's why the need for really clear, open conversation and education is so
Yeah.
so important, because once women know, they can have a plan of action. But if you don't know, you're just like, I don't know what to do.
Well, it's almost like what you said about having like the suicidal thoughts in pregnancy and postpartum. Like if you don't talk about it, you think it's only you and you think you're losing your mind and it's scary because you think, someone's going to commit you or something like that. When we finally start talking about, the majority of menopause symptoms are probably symptoms you could attribute to any mom with a child in this day and age with a job right now. Like, I mean, or not, like they're kind of all the same. And then
Yeah.
when our, when our stereotypical idea of hot flashes was, Blanche Devereaux on Golden Girls, it's like with white hair, like, okay, I don't connect with that.
Right.
So you don't know what the hell to do with it. And if nobody's talking about it and you don't know what to do with it, then
Yeah. Yeah. It's crazy
it's a
making.
it's a wreck and a half. So at what point did you realize, like, did it finally take for you to like have changes in your cycle to finally be like, oh, okay, I'm here? Or what was it that finally led you to believe, or what did somebody say to help you kind of figure out that that's where you were?
It was I slammed pretty much headlong into what I would consider the crux, of my perimenopause experience, if you will, probably around 48, 49, which
Okay.
ironically is when I was, starting to work with Stacy on some of this. And I it was really the body composition changes, because I've always been a
Mm.
very, very muscular woman.
Mhm.
And um it literally looked like overnight a lot of my muscles had just sort of deflated, like I'd gone away. And I had heard women tell me that when I was a very young trainer, and I say this all the time on podcasts, but I apologize every time because I feel bad, because I never believe them,
Yeah.
But now that you look at what hormones do, and the estrogen is anabolic and all of this, and that it just sort of just goes woo and right off a cliff, it makes sense. I mean, this stuff does
Right.
happen pretty quickly. But my power was down. I was still racing, and my body composition shifting. The moods had sort of kind of gotten a little better, but I was like really furnacing at night. So like sprinkler system, at
Yeah.
dripping wet. And I contacted Stacy sort of in the midst of all that. And Stacy Sims, Dr. Sims. And I said, I don't know if I can write this book, because I can't, like, I don't have my shit together. Like, this is not good. And she's like, calm down, let's
Yeah.
talk. And she had me doing all the stuff that I talk about in Next Level with her. I had never really had to lift heavy. I started lifting heavier, and that really changed things. That changed my mood. That changed my
Mhm.
body composition. That's probably the best thing I did for myself at that time, is really change my training in that way. I started using like hormone therapy really wasn't on my radar because the hot
Mhm.
flashes weren't that bad, and I was just like not thinking that way. I
Mhm.
mean, maybe now I would, but now I feel so great. I don't care. But
Yeah.
anyway, I started using some of the adaptogens that are pretty common now,
Mhm.
like ashwagandha. That helped my mood a lot. I slept better. And yeah, things just got better. And then I won a major race when I was 50, and I sort of called it on racing at the schedule that I was, but I was very satisfied that I had a sense of control again.
Yeah. No, I think that's a good point. And what's interesting to me about kind of when all this stuff started to come up about lifting heavy and so on is at least over in our rehab world, we were starting to get more evidence on kind of using load and adding it to cross training and for rehab purposes. And
Yeah.
so I almost feel like it was just kind of shoved in this corner for a while, and then we pulled it out and it's like, okay, no, it's great here, it's great here, it's great here. I didn't start.
Brain health, like the stuff is
Right?
just
Yeah.
the research there is really good.
But and I mean, it's so interesting. I don't know if you've ever read, uh, Daniel Friedman, she wrote, Let's Get Physical, kind of like the history of kind of, workouts and women and that
Oh, I
sort of thing.
haven't. I'm
Oh,
curious
it's
about
a
that.
good one. It's almost like a
Okay.
prequel to, Christine Yu's Up to Speed. Like, they're
Yeah,
both
yeah.
really good together.
Yep. Okay.
But just society-wise, like, we weren't lifting weights, it wasn't appropriate for women to do this, but now all of a
Yep.
sudden it's like, actually, it's great for runners and performance and, the beginning of CrossFit and Olympic lifting and more kind of
Yeah.
even women just being there.
Yep.
And I mean, I remember back, God, we hated CrossFit so much in my field, back in the like 2013. They're
You
like,
weren't alone.
I
Yeah.
it's so funny. They're like, "Oh, it's okay to pee when you lift," and all that kind of stuff. Meanwhile, when my youngest was 3, I started lifting, and all of a sudden things are feeling a lot better, and, my hips better and things are good. It's just so funny to watch these things that were so not okay to do, that these are the things that we're going to and we're finding benefits from. Like,
We were told to lift 5 to 10 pounds. That's like a bag of cat food. It's not even a bag of dog food. My dog food bags are 30 to 50, like what
so,
do we what were we saying?
the worst thing about that, in postpartum literature, we're finally getting researchers that are, looking at women who are actually lifting, 180, 200 pounds, lifting, actual Olympic lifting in pregnancy and their outcomes in postpartum. But we still have people doing research that are talking about just like banded exercises and body weight exercises in pregnancy. I'm like, if we keep still putting this shit out, like, it's not reflective of what we need later on, much less right now. And I feel
Right.
like that's sort of my big reflection now, diving into this menopause space, is like, we need to look at how we're eating. We need to look at what we're lifting and kind of our exercise. Shouldn't we be looking at this sooner?
It would help.
And I have
Can't hurt.
conversation. Right. No, I mean, for you, like, what was it that got you under a barbell? Like, what was the thing where you're like, oh, okay, this is
Because my body, I was just like, I this, like it was changing, and I
yeah,
was just like, "Oh, okay. I guess I should try that thing." And wow, I mean, it really was revelatory. I mean, I
yeah.
had lifted, I had done sort of a lot of body weight stuff. I just never got in the gym because, like I said, I was very muscular and it was mountain bike
Mhm.
racing. And at the time, endurance athletes were discouraged from
Right.
heavy lifting, which
Exactly.
is ludicrous. I mean, let's just talk about how ludicrous that is. It makes no sense to sit there when you're an endurance athlete and you have so much repetitive motion anyway to do all
Right.
the 3 sets of 10 reps. I mean, it doesn't even make sense.
Right.
You want that neuromuscular stimulation. You're not actually looking for hypertrophy. You're looking for strength as an
Right.
endurance athlete and efficiency and economy. And all those things come from actually like load, heavy lifting
Right.
in your central nervous system. So once I got in there, like it was more than anything. I mean, yes, my muscles return to it. They'll never be back to what they were. Whatever. I'm 55, but they're way better than they were, and I
Yeah.
feel stronger again. But it was how quickly my mood improved and my energy
Mm.
and everything, and I was like, wow, I feel strong again. And it was just very, very eye opening.
How much did you kind of like do in the beginning, and how long did it take you to sort of notice those changes?
So I actually did go to our CrossFit gym because it's very
Mhm.
close, and I know
Yeah.
a bunch of my friends go there.
Yep.
And it's funny because what I didn't like is I wanted it to be a practice that helped me on my bike and running and stuff. I
Mhm.
didn't want it to be a means to its own end. Do you know
Yes,
what I mean? And
I
that's where
do.
I struggled with CrossFit is like
Yep.
the whiteboard and the competition. I'm like, no, 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 no. I
I
don't
don't
want
count
this to be
reps.
a competitive space. I'm trying to put that Selene over there. I don't want
Yes,
her, because
agreed.
I am an athlete. Like I just didn't want it for that. I just
Yep.
wanted to be like, but they were very cool with me, and I'm like, I'm not kipping, I'm not doing some of this stuff because I've got this shoulder that I've ripped out of my joint a bunch of times. Anyway, but I started there, and they took me through the Olympic lifts, and
Mhm.
they have a whole like onboarding kind of
Yeah.
thing, and it literally was within a couple of weeks. I just felt.
Mm.
I felt amazing after the first couple of times. I had never deadlift heavy before, and I'm like, this is
Yeah.
magic. I want this in my life always.
Yep.
Um, yeah, so it just
Do
because
you
I wasn't
notice
even
it?
sore from it. No, I felt it almost immediately on my bike. I feel it
Yeah.
all the time. Like when I'm going up a hill, I'm like, I'm
You've
so
got
glad I
power.
picked up. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you notice it if you take a couple weeks off from it?
I'm pretty actually the benefits hang out fairly long, not as
Mhm.
long as I would like, because I will be 100% honest, come July when it's sunny all the time and I'm
You
like,
wanna be on your bike.
I'm on my bike. But then like it's probably within 6 weeks I'm like
Yeah.
you gotta get back, I can feel it. I can feel when it's starting to the
Yeah.
maintenance is going and I
No,
need to get back to it.
I feel it too. I only can get in like twice a week, and I'm the same as you. Like I'm a runner from a long way back. I don't have the flexibility to kip. Like it's just my body's just not made that way. Um, I feel awesome when the schedules, squats and deadlifts and whatever kind of random box jumps get thrown in. But like right now we're on a cycle where it's like bench press on the day I can go and like push press. And we had this in the fall, and I was shocked how things started to not feel great in the running when I didn't have that. So I've got to figure out now
Mm.
how I don't miss any of it because bench press isn't going to cut it.
Yeah, it's nice for what it is, but it's not gonna work
No,
for what you're
no.
looking
So
for your running economy.
no, now I'm cherry picking CrossFit workouts, but whatever.
Yeah.
No, but I think that's such a good point to be like when something is right, you feel it, and I think
You do.
that's one of the things that I try and have that discussion with moms early on about getting under a barbell because I'm like, once you feel it, one, you feel totally badass,
Yeah.
but the other is you just feel better. And that's why I stick with it. Like those first, couple months where, of lockdown where I didn't have anything and I was like, I felt it. I
Yeah.
felt it. And I think when you find that thing that feels right to your body, um, there's something to be said for that.
And I will
Um,
share with you that I like last um fall, I think it was just this last menopause
mhm,
conference. So the Menopause Society has, these
mhm.
very scientific sessions and meetings. I go for
Yeah.
4 days of just whoo. But like last time, there were a few sessions where they started talking about the benefits of like patients that had taken up powerlifting.
Mhm.
Not only for like body composition and all that, but like brain health and prevention of Alzheimer's and all this stuff. And as all these scientific sessions go, the guy speaking is like, "But you don't need to tell your women to take up powerlifting." And I was like, "Why not?
Or we
Why
could.
not? Right? Why? You just showed this amazing example." And then she got her mom to start and how they like it improved their bone density and blah blah blah. And
Right.
look, it stimulates irisin for your brain. And I'm like, why are we afraid to tell
Yeah.
women to do this?
Well, again, I've been thinking a lot about this. I was talking to my mom, the other day. My
And
mom was
bone health. Bone
right,
health
exactly,
care,
exactly.
especially for postpartum, early peri women. Lift, lift,
Well,
lift. Go
again,
ahead.
that's where the parallels are too. And if we can nail some of these things down sooner, or
Yeah.
even just, I don't know, teach our young children.
Yeah. No, it just as I said that, I was like, we need to make sure we talk about that.
To go sooner. Yeah, no,
Yeah.
100%. My mom was I feel like it's, like, societal too because we were talking last night, about,
like her mother was very sedentary, and that was just kind of what you did when you got older. My mom was very active. She built our house with my dad. She was always in the garden. When I went off to college, she would go into work and go to the gym or go swimming in the morning, which was very not like, this is like late 80s, early 90s. That was not
Yeah.
typical. And now she's very active now. And, unfortunately she fractured her ankle last year mountain biking. I was like, that's all right. You're mountain biking, mom. But it very much, I'm looking forward to seeing what this next generation of menopausal women who are coming in more active because we had permission, or
Totally.
we're just freaking doing it in
Totally.
postpartum. And again, I think those of us that there's not a lot of time between postpartum and peri,
Yep.
we're going to see a lot of shift in that a lot sooner. And so these conversations have to come up. And I think we're going to see the outcomes because these women have been lifting longer.
Yep, 100% agree. I'm very, very interested to see, because so much of it's in, and that dovetails with the um, inactivity, the
Yeah.
inactivity through line that runs through aging research too, because
Yep.
we've been told, like, oh, you lose 3 to 8% of your muscle loss every 5-10 years,
Mhm.
your VO2 declines, blah blah blah. But that's none of that is based off of people who have been active
No.
for their whole lives. And I just picked up an issue today of ACSM, and they had a bunch of studies in there about sex differences, and one of
Mhm.
them was on neuromuscular decline in women as they hit the menopause transition. But I was like, but these women aren't lifting either. I mean, is it use it or lose it? We
Right.
don't know, right? We don't know. All of this is sedentary people.
Right.
So it's just a different population
Right.
entirely.
Well, and
And we
and
know that those declines are different. And
well, I think that's a good point too, is like we kind of almost have these separate conversations of, one, we're very inactive as Americans, period.
right.
So okay, we need to get more activity. So great, do something. But then there's those people who are active. How can we get them doing the right things sooner? And to
Mm.
know what those things are, and then to find that motivation. And I do think it goes back to body composition that you kind of mentioned earlier. Um, you know, and we come from a generation where it was always calorie deficit. It was always overtraining, underfueling. We grew up with Weight Watchers commercials and that kind of stuff. And we assume that that will work all the way through. And, if it did keep working, then you slam into the wall of, this change. How do we kind of
And what we were told was fat,
wrong?
quote unquote fat,
Right.
right, is ludicrous. I mean, you're
Right.
talking that they were talking about 130-pound women, like,
I
being,
know.
I mean, it's awful. Like, it's truly, truly awful.
Yeah.
And I see it in my community. It's like the damage is forever. I mean, it's
Mhm.
just in their heads, and they can't. So I enjoy this taking up space that is happening in younger generations of women who are not afraid to, like, have a body and lift weights
Right.
and do some of this stuff. But the problem that is that you're talking about, especially in this generation, and it includes this generation of women just leaving postpartum and going into peri, is we now also understand how low energy availability, which is often driven by low
Yes.
carbohydrate availability, is so bad for you, and also
Yep.
mirrors perimenopause and some of that stuff. So you get
Yep.
this real tangled bird's nest of stuff. But, like, if you're not fueling yourself
Right.
appropriately, you are doing a lot of hormonal damage and bone
Yep.
damage and metabolic. It's not it and you may have the opposite of what you're looking for, as your body is hanging on to weight and hanging on to fat. So then women
Right.
go deeper into, I must eat less, and it just sets up this vicious cycle that creates hormonal havoc that has very long-term consequences, and
Yeah.
that needs to get out too.
Well, and that one I feel like, especially I think, with the female athlete conference last year, that was such a big theme.
It was a
And then
huge theme. Yeah, I was
pulling it
there.
out for lactating women, but then
Yeah.
also again the parallel in menopausal, um, even just people knowing that that is a thing. And I think some of that has also come out with so many, again, with so many athletes trying to return to sport,
Yeah.
especially in postpartum, but in the rear view saying, "Oh yeah, I got delayed because of stress fractures or
Yep.
this or that." And where they're really talking about this really well, I think, is in the ultra community.
Yeah.
And talking, because fueling is not taboo. You need to freaking fuel to run a long ass time.
Yes, you do.
And I love that they're like, all right, we need 90 grams of carbs an
Can
hour.
we go
And
to
I'm like,
100? What can we do?
holy
Yeah.
crap. No, but I feel like those conversations, that it's the normative, it's a normalization of that conversation that makes them able to have it. Then we
Yeah.
need to pull that over to, these other spaces and places where talking about food was like, no, you don't look fit, or you're not an athlete, or when actually, no, that we need to talk about what you're eating and so on.
Yeah.
And I know you've talked about that at length kind of over the years. What are some thoughts that you have about having that fueling conversation with just like the average, athlete?
I have it all the time. I mean, I
Yeah.
have it all the time. I it is, and again, I think this goes back to what we were saying about before about how you feel.
Yeah.
Like and I just saw there's this big conversation going on in our Hit Play Not Pause Facebook group where a woman hired a sports dietitian who got her to finally like eat and actually eat enough carbohydrates. And she's like, my God, I feel amazing. My training sessions are great. And my weight is stable and it's actually
Yeah.
down and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, yeah, I mean, low energy availability, low carbohydrate availability, it's not good for your performance or your health. And I that's why I get really irritated with the intermittent fasting conversation. Like,
Yeah.
because women never, not just women, most people when they do it, they skip that morning meal, right? That's how they do it.
Yep.
And that's like the most counterproductive way for a
I
woman to
know.
to do that. Like your cortisol is already up. You have a very long active day ahead of you. And it's not good for your body to just go into that on E. Your body, like women's bodies are exquisitely sensitive to low energy availability. And
Mhm.
it's not going to work for anything you want to do. If you are bound and determined to do some sort of like intermittent fasting, please front load your day and then taper down towards
Right.
the end, and then give yourself a 12-hour fast. Like stop eating at 7 and don't eat again until 7. Great 12-hour fast, right? Like however that
Yep.
looks for you. But there's no need to like to do this artificial construct that isn't serving you.
Right. Did you see something recently? I think they connected intermittent fasting. I don't know if it was brain changes, negative brain changes, or it was something recently. It was like in the last couple of weeks. But no, it's funny. I kind of think back to I started doing more training for 10 milers, things like that, a number of years ago. And I mean, I've always just gotten up in the morning and gone for a run and then come back home and then eaten. But again, back in the day too, like your fuel options were to crunch down a granola bar in the middle of a race, which is like chewing and running are really hard. Um, but I will never forget, a couple years ago, I did a Army 10 miler and didn't fuel, just did, like Gatorade or something like that, and felt like trash at the end. I was like, this sucks. If this is who I am right now, this blows. A year later, did start to do some more fueling. I like, if I'm running any longer than 45 minutes, I'm taking a gel before and during that. And I don't feel like trash the rest of the day. I can function, I can do other things. And once I saw that, I was like, okay, why didn't we know this stuff before? And I think some of it is tech and fuels and kind of what we know about them. But again, it's the conversations. Had somebody not mentioned something to me about it or asked, like I wouldn't have known. But for somebody that's new to it, what's a good way to start? Because as you and I both know, you need to feel that, you need to experience that to have the buy-in. What's an easy way to introduce somebody who hasn't fueled correctly before?
I honestly just say, because a lot of people hear that, they hear this message and they think, oh, I need to get up like 4 hours early and have this giant breakfast. And
No.
that's actually not I mean, maybe depending on what you're doing, if I'm doing a stage race all day, I might,
Yeah.
but just your brain just needs to sense that you've got some fuel on board. That
Yeah.
literally means maybe 100 calories or something. You
Yep.
really don't need that much.
No.
Like you're saying, like that, like whatever a few bites of food, a gel if that's what you like to do, whatever it is.
Yep.
Like I just make before I lift every morning around 7 o'clock, and I just have like a shake. that has
Mhm.
it's just got a little shot of espresso and some oat milk or whatever it is,
Mhm.
but it's just like just some calories. So like your brain just senses like, oh, she's got food, and like it your blood sugar goes up a little bit, and that's all you're looking for. You're not looking to like put a bunch of calories in your system. Like it's not what you're looking for.
Right.
Like you just need something. Just
Yeah.
need something. That's start there and
And
see,
I don't
see how you
think
feel.
that conversation should be isolated to just perimenopausal and menopausal women. I feel like that should go back, 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 back,
Yeah,
back.
I agree.
I mean, my 10-year-old, we were just on spring break and she's like, "Oh, can I go run with you?" I'm like, "Great. Have a little bite of something before we go." I don't care what it is. I just want her
Totally.
to get used to this is normal. This is what we do.
I've been known to
Um,
just like throw a few raisins and a spoonful of peanut butter in my face and go
great.
out the door.
Yeah.
Like it's literally nothing. Yeah,
No, and that's the thing. It's like we create these barriers that it has to be this perfect thing or this perfect food or
totally.
whatever. Like have a freaking banana. Like somebody's
Totally.
got a banana, you
Yeah.
know?
It really isn't that complicated.
Yeah. No, I mean, I feel like that conversation, and just getting people to just start thinking about that has been a huge shift that I've noticed. The other, I think has been even beyond like the macros conversation, but like eating carbs is not a bad thing. Eating protein in the right amount is not a bad thing. Like what's kind of been your experience kind of watching that evolve?
It's easy to get like protein is ever sexy, right? Like it's kind of easy. It's kind of easy to get women on board. Like it's for whatever reason, it's been the one that's like stood the test of time when even when fat was demonized and now
Yeah.
carbs are demonized, protein always wears this crown. Like,
Ah!
okay. But even then, like a lot of women still, I think I'm not a big macro counter. I don't like for myself, I enjoy food. I enjoy all of it. I
Mhm.
don't want to count all the stuff. I do think it's worthwhile like having a day or two where you have just a general idea because you might
Yep.
be getting less than you think you
Yeah.
are. And I have talked to many women in the group who once they started hitting their protein, like they stopped being so sore, they had
Mhm.
better recovery. All that stuff is really important. You are more anabolically resistant. It's harder to make muscle and protein synthesis. So you just need more protein. You need it throughout the day. And I
Mhm.
think that conversation is very easy and women are not afraid of it because they don't um, associate protein with fat. Now
Yeah.
you start talking about carbs, which has been low carb makes no more sense than low fat did
Right.
in the 90s. We're just doing it again. We're just doing it with another macronutrient, right? Do you have to like with fat pay attention to, maybe eating healthier sources? Sure, but that's everything. I mean,
Right.
having ultra processed foods all the time is just not good for us. We know that,
Yeah.
but like that does not mean no carbs.
Right.
Like carbs are you need them for fat burning, you need them for high intensity exercise, you need them for your mood. They support all kinds of things for your hormonal health, like cutting them out. So I just have people like just introduce some nice, healthy, whole carbs into your diet and see how you feel. And again, if you
Mhm.
listen to how you feel, most people feel way better. Their moods are better, their energy is better, their sleep is better. That's a
Yeah.
big one for perimenopausal, and their sleep is better.
Yeah. No, I think
Your
that's a
serotonin's better. I mean, like it's really important.
no, that's definitely one of those things that, I in postpartum, obviously, sleep gets screwed up quite a bit, and we learn to live with less of it. And then when kids learn how to sleep, we enjoy more of it. But then it goes to hell in a handbasket again.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, kind of when you were starting to go through all of this, like what was conventional wisdom at that point? Like suck it up, or I mean, what got you to like the ashwanga and that kind of stuff?
Um, because I was writing about it, quite honestly. Like
Is it
if I wasn't writing about it, I don't know if I ever would have found it, if
right?
I can be honest with you.
I
But
have
like,
said that about my own, like, pelvic floor pregnancy issues, like, I was like, "If I was not in this space, I would be a freaking wreck and a half."
yeah, so I mean the sleep thing I would just practice because as a ultra endurance athlete, like sometimes you're out on a bike for 9 hours, right? Like you
Mhm.
have to learn a lot of self-talk. So I would just wake up and I was very good at just sort of being like, I'm okay. It's okay. And just like counting, talking myself down. my own little cognitive behavioral therapy, that I was doing, that I didn't know that that's what it
Right.
was. And it helped quite a bit. Again, once I understood what was going on, like
Right.
it became much easier to deal with it. But there was a lot of just bumbling around until
Yeah.
honestly, and if it weren't for the next level book, I don't honestly know. I
Yeah.
don't.
I didn't even think about that, like being tired on a long bike ride, how dangerous that is.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, you're in pain. There's a lot of
Right?
things you have to sort of manage, a lot of stuff. Maybe your gut's not happy. There's a lot of like your brain
Yeah.
has a lot of work to do to keep all the pieces moving forward.
Yeah. Was that kind of disconcerting as you're kind of noticing those changes a little bit, like, and you're shifting from kind of into that perimenopause that did you notice changes in your beyond just like your performance, but just how you were experiencing your sport?
Yeah, I really didn't until I hit it, until like very close to menopause.
Okay.
Like when I was sort of having those anxiety and having all that stuff, like the performances were all like all that stuff, the training and racing was still going super well.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until I got pretty close to, that 50, 51 mark, those,
Right.
and that's common for a lot of women. Like
Yep.
there's just like a window of a year or two where it's like, whoa, this is really, some women have it worse. Don't get me wrong. Like some women have like many years of that. Some women have very
Mhm.
few. But for me, it was just a couple of years where it sort of ramped up, and then things started to really change pretty quickly. And I was like, I have got to do something. And that's when
Yeah.
I, was writing about it and talked to Stacy and was like, well, if you want me to be your co-author, we need help.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, and I think, I mean, because we just went back earlier and we said, okay, the next level came out 2 years ago. So obviously, if you're writing a book for a period of time before that, like looking back on when you were writing that, do you feel like, okay, we need to go back and revise already again because so much stuff has changed, even just in the last few years?
Not as much. I mean,
Yeah.
because pretty much we don't, she's not, we don't talk a whole lot about hormone therapy,
Yeah.
aside from sort of talking about which everybody had talked about already at that point. Like people had
Hmm.
already started looking at the WHI and going,
Right.
like
Yep.
there's problems there.
Yeah.
So I would need to go back into it and see if like we would expand that conversation a little bit. But that conversation is still, there's a lot of research that still needs to be done there.
There is.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, there is. And but again, I mean, I feel like you kind of started the platform, with Roar about like, hey, we need to look at these basic things. And then it really just sort of evolved with next level being
Yeah.
like, okay, this is how these things change. For you, kind of going from one book to the next, like what do you feel like if somebody hasn't read Roar yet? And they're just diving into next level because they're like, hey, this is kind of where I'm at in my life. What are going to be the biggest takeaways for them? What are the things that are going to need to pay attention to the most?
So if they are in the menopause transition and they're picking
Yeah.
up next level,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, it really is a lot of the things that we have talked about. I mean, we spend
Yeah.
the first part of the book just explaining all the roles that your ovarian hormones have,
Yeah.
right? So I think that is something that is very eye-opening for a lot of women. Like they don't
Yeah.
understand all the roles that estradiol
No.
has. That is amazing. Those hormones, like they have a lot of roles. And when those hormones start changing, then you understand better, like, oh, that's why I'm experiencing this. And also, like, one of the things that we really wanted to do in the book was talk about, like, so your hormones do all this work and then they start to fluctuate and they go down to a lower base level, right? So the way I have always put it is the advice in the book is to help you pick up some of the slack that those hormones have done in your life, right?
Yeah.
So that's why lifting heavier becomes more important, because estrogen used to carry that load a little bit more for you.
Right.
And when you have lower levels, even if you're on hormone therapy, like you still need, it doesn't take you back.
Right.
It's not like you're not turning it back to premenopausal levels. It's not
Right.
about that. So you still need to just sort of do some of that work, to
Hmm.
like maintain some of those systems that maybe automatically were done for you, before.
Yeah.
So like that's just how we look at it. So it
Yeah.
is, stuff like lifting heavy, making sure that you polarize your training a little bit more. A lot of women have better luck. And you even talk to people like a Camille Herron, who's
Yes.
42 and smashing every record.
Right.
She was on my show, and she's like, I can't bury myself with as much volume as people think, and I hear that
Yeah.
quite a bit. Like they do better if they turn down the volume, spend more time in the easier zone and the harder zone, and less time in that middle. I mean that.
Right.
Because you need more recovery time, you need, your body just might respond better to that. It's all kinds of advice like that. We include about the adaptogens that some women have success with, and also some of the changes that happen with your nutrition. Some women do become more insulin resistant, carbohydrate sensitive. So, prioritizing fiber rich carb sources. Like none of this is
Yeah.
rocket science, but a lot
Right.
of it has really profound effects if you implement it.
Yeah. No, I almost feel like that first chapter, we need, because I'm going to give you more work to do. We need a children's book version of that.
Oh, we have actually talked about it. Yeah.
No, I mean, because if you think about where does the average person get their information about hormones? It's elementary school, middle school.
Yeah.
Girls have estrogen, boys have testosterone, so we've already screwed that up. And then from there, maybe they hear a little bit about it in pregnancy, like, oh, you have lots of estrogen, and then they blame relaxin for everything, and it's probably all estrogen anyway. And then they blame breastfeeding for everything, and then it's like radio silent.
Yeah.
And then it's like, and we took all your estrogen away and you're screwed. And so, but they only talk about it in the context of reproductive stuff
Right.
or hot flashes. And so
Yep.
just even that basic discussion of where you have estrogen receptors in your body, in your tendons, in your organs, in your brain,
Yep.
and all this stuff, like just start with that. And start with estrogen and
Yes.
testosterone are in males and females. Like, can we just start with that? Like,
the bar is
book
very
is
low.
done. We need an illustrator now.
Yeah.
No, and I feel like that would just stop so much misinformation if we just started with that, because and even just understanding, I mean, when did you finally realize kind of like what a basic cycle looked like and kind of what things started to look like as far as even just like estrogen, progesterone, as far as, different stages of life? Do you remember kind of, it probably was just research for a book, right?
I was going to say when I wrote Roar.
Yeah, no, I'm serious though.
No, I'm serious too.
Same
And
thing.
that answered so many things for me, because I
Right.
had always had, it's so funny, when I went out to her and we did like a lot of like with a bunch of other pro race cyclist women,
Mhm.
and we did all these sessions and like motor pacing and hill repeats and peeing on those urinalysis strips and doing all this stuff. And
Mhm.
I had always struggled with my thermoregulation in a couple of days before my period, which I didn't know until I
Mm.
started tracking,
Oh, isn't that interesting?
it felt kind of random to me. And then I was
Yeah.
like, Stacy had me tracking. I was like, oh, and then she explained like how, your blood plasma can shift 8% in the luteal phase, right? And I was like,
Oh.
but that's the kind of thing, like when you know that, then you can plan for it. So I just started
Right.
like using some of those hyperhydration drinks
Mhm.
beforehand during that time. It's like much better. So it wasn't like I needed to throw everything up in the air and change evering. I just needed to
Right.
make a couple of adjustments for what my physiology was doing, and it
Right.
helped.
Yeah, no, same thing with me. I was having changes in postpartum with like prolapse and leakage symptoms, and
Mm,
they seemed kind of to come at random. And then finally I was like, okay, we're just going to do red, yellow, green. And then when you look back in the rear view, it's a very clear pattern. And I'm like, oh,
interesting.
there's a hormone shift. And there's some people that do have that
Yep.
hormone shift as a part of their symptoms. And it makes
Yep.
sense when you just overlay the cycle on it. But again, if people don't know to look for that stuff and they don't know that these are possibilities, I do think that like there's some connections that I think are a little bit easier. There's a lot more conversations now about like menopausal women and frozen shoulder.
Yep.
There is some more studies looking at kind of like hip tendinopathies and menopausal women and that sort of
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
But again, like the more we talk about it, the more we know to check that box and to consider it. Otherwise, it's like, oh, you're just getting old. This is just what happens, which is total BS.
Well, and that's why women leave sport.
Right.
I mean, if they don't know, they're just like, oh, I guess I'm done.
Mhm.
You know?
Yeah. No. It's I feel like all of that stuff, it just gets coughed up to whatever. I mean, my neighbor, poor guy, he was picking up a boulder, and um he tore his bicep tendon, and it curled up in the whole Popeye sign thing, whatever. And this was 6 weeks ago. And I was like, wait, you should have told me you need this operated on. And his partner was like, oh, you just shouldn't be lifting things as a middle-aged old man. And I was like, no. And he's a really
No.
active guy. And I was like, if you're 85, we'll have that conversation. But like, you're mid 40s. This is not
Oh,
like,
yeah. No.
no,
This is not the time to sit
no,
down and yeah,
no. And I was like,
stop
we
doing
can't,
things.
I'm like, we can't cough this stuff up to whatever. And I do think this is where women are, just putting the middle finger up at this point, being like, no, I want to keep doing this stuff. I enjoy it. This is who I am.
Yep.
Show me how, because I'm not gonna say no. And I think
Yeah.
that's where we've had to navigate a lot of problems in postpartum, because more women were being more active. And I think that's probably where we're going with menopause as well.
Yeah, no, and those are both. I mean, obviously, I'm in the menopause space, but the postpartum space is super important in the same way. And you know, to your point, we're seeing more women, which is great. Like
Mhm.
managing a professional elite level of sports with motherhood,
Yeah.
but like, let's not sugarcoat how hard that
Oh God,
is.
no.
Yeah,
Well, and again, I think initially it was just, let's get a seat at the table.
yeah,
And then once they got a seat at the table, okay, now we can perform, and now we can be open about how hard this really is and all the challenges leading up to it. And now we can go back and be like, all right, if, as long as we're going to be open about this, let's figure out how we can prevent stress fractures in low estrogen
totally.
states, and
Yep.
how we can, navigate some of these other challenges and so on. But um, I find myself referring back to the history a lot lately, because people are like, well, why don't we have these answers? Why don't we, have this stuff in research? And it's because research was predominantly men doing the research. The participants were primarily men. We weren't prioritizing and recognizing the differences, and we weren't asking the right questions, because there was the assumption that, it was just everybody was the same thing. So, I mean, really, it's only been less than 10 years that I feel like we're really having these bigger conversations about it. And I mean, books like yours and Dr. Sims, like, really, I do think deserve so much credit for opening that door. And I know you said it wasn't popular at the time, but damn, it is now.
Yeah, well, I mean, it took just getting it out there, like you
Yeah.
know, once people had access to it and knew it existed, it did take off, and that is a great thing. And yeah, I mean, I did a podcast with Dr. Elizabeth Coleman, who wrote All in Her Head, which I also recommend when you
Yeah.
talk about the
Mhm.
history,
Yep.
because uh she goes back to how women were, not only were they burned at stakes for
Right.
practicing like medicine, they weren't allowed in medical school. When medical
Right.
schools, they were forbidden to enter. And you talked about like not doing research on women. They didn't even do research on female cell lines or female
Right.
mice. I mean, it goes all the way back to that. I mean, I've had very big women like on my show who have just been like, we might need to just throw all of it out, because it's we've not, everything has been so grounded in a hostile to women
Yeah.
environment that it's gonna take a minute for us to catch up
Yeah.
with all of this.
Yeah, no, I think so too. But I think even just little steps that we can make, I feel like people are much better social media wise about, if you're sharing, research says, look at the methodology.
Yeah, yeah,
Look, is
people are
it
getting way more savvy about that.
yeah, and I mean, it makes a difference. And I
Yeah.
think more people are, stepping into the research arena and asking those questions and things like that, which it needs to happen. Some of the conversations that you have on your podcast, what are some of the most memorable ones, for you?
Wow, that's a hard one, because I make it when I was writing a lot, for magazines. I would always make it a goal to learn something from each feature I wrote. And that's how I feel with every podcast episode is
Yeah.
like my goal is to learn something for each one.
Mhm.
So I really do have a soft spot for almost all of the episodes. I think that the ones that really stand out for me are the ones of women, just like I just interviewed Caroline Paul, who wrote Tough Broads. And I
Mhm.
like that conversation really stands out for me because it's, I started the show to show some of the positives because I think there's a lot of positives in menopause that don't get talked about enough.
Yeah.
Like you just come into this place, and I certainly feel it. Like I've never been more emotionally stable. I've never
Yeah.
been more like very comfortable in my skin and like not afraid to put myself out there. And a lot of that, even like Lisa Mosconi's when she's talking about the brain health, like that's one of the things that she talks about a lot. She's like, I hear it
Mhm.
over and over again. Women get like more stable, they feel better, post menopause. And this book, Tough Broads, has all these women who are like doing really great things. They're base jumping or bird watching or just being outside and engaging life. And all of them say that their happiest time of life is their 60s.
Oh,
Even the
isn't that
women who are
interesting?
like 80 or 90, they're like, what decade would you go back to? And they all just say their 60s.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I think we need to really hone into that. We get this message of,
Mm.
we all hear the negatives, but man, there's a lot of positives out there. And I think that that's what really stands out for me when I do my show is just there's a lot of positivity that,
Yeah.
isn't artificial, isn't forced, isn't toxic,
Yeah.
like it's real.
Yeah. No, and I again, more examples of women, um, I think just doing really cool stuff
Yeah.
and being more active. And it's not, okay, you settle down but to kind of like what you said earlier, like, especially here, I'm in the DC metro area and we're all older moms here. And for the most part, and I'm almost 48 and, I've still got young kids. I'm like, okay, I'm not going to hit a 50 and over community because I've got young kids. Like,
Yeah.
it's not going to happen. So I've got to stay like in my head. I'm like, I'm not thinking of the typical 55-year-old retired federal worker. Like that's
Oh,
it's not
yeah.
where I
No.
live, like with retirement, whatever. It's like, no, I got stuff to keep up with. And so I think that that idea of who we are in this space, it does not match what we were taught as kids.
Not at
And
all.
kind of trying to reconcile that and being and feeling who we want to be and having examples of people saying, yeah, you can do that and not be, the Golden Girls. Not that there was anything wrong with that, but like, I don't need to be in a retirement community in
Yeah, I
Florida
mean,
at 55.
it was just different. I mean, I looked up, I don't know if you remember All in the Family and
Oh,
Edith
yeah.
and Archie Bunker.
Oh,
They were
yeah.
47 and 48.
No.
Yes. I
No.
almost fell off my chair
Are
when
you
I looked.
serious?
Yes.
Oh my god. No wonder we're all
Right?
messed up.
Right. That was my exact thought. I'm like, this was the imagery that we had. I mean, it's just
No,
people are
it
just
doesn't
aging
match
differently.
it.
People are living differently.
Yeah.
It's just it is a different time. So like all the ideas, the preconceived ideas have to get swept to the
Yeah.
wayside because they're not applicable to people who are living very different
Right.
lives.
No, and I don't think you can have these conversations without understanding the context of where we came up, and that was the role models that we had.
Yeah, I mean, that's what it looks like. Okay, I guess that's what it looks like.
Right? Like I'm gonna have to go back and look at that now. That's crazy. Well, I mean, think about it. I mean, by the time you're 50, you're supposed to have grandkids, right? I'm like, oh no,
Well, there's that. I mean, Edith broke ground. Like she went through
yeah,
menopause. There's a series of
yeah,
Edith's change,
right.
and so she was like 49. She was,
So she was on average too. Wow.
yeah,
Okay. All right. I'm gonna go back and look at that one. Wow. Man, but again, like I do appreciate again more people just being so open and having these conversations. And again, it's a double-edged sword, I think, of social media is, with all the comparison crap, but you also have people seeing and doing things that can encourage you and be supportive and
100%.
having communities like yours that like, hey, you can ask the questions and not feel stupid and not feel like you're alone on an island.
Yeah.
And that's how we learn and how we kind of move this stuff forward for sure.
Amen.
So Yeah, no, definitely, definitely. All right, at the end of every episode, I ask a few questions.
Oh, okay.
Nothing too deep and scary. All right, book you're reading or podcast you're listening to right now.
Oh, okay. I just read Remarkably Bright Creatures, which is
Ooh.
this great, 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 charming, wonderful book that has an octopus as the main character.
Oh.
And I just love it with all my heart. It's
Oh.
so good. And I just got turned on to, I listen to a lot of podcasts,
Mhm.
but Julia Louise-Dreyfus's podcast, Wiser
Yes.
Than Me, I didn't even know that existed. The New York Times featured her, and I was like,
Yeah.
oh, I listened to the episode she did with Carol Burnett and was weeping in my grocery store as I
Oh my
was.
gosh.
It's so beautiful. Like the conversations. Carol Burnett is 90, and just their conversations together. And then at the end of
Yeah.
every episode, she downloads with her mom, like Julia calls her, and they talk about. I'm literally like there's tears running down
Oh
my
my
face as I'm like
gosh.
pushing my cart. It's beautiful. I highly
Okay.
recommend it.
That's been on my list. This year has been one of the first years where like the kids go to practice for like an hour and a half, and
Mhm.
then I go take the dog and go for a walk, and I get my podcast stuff in there. So we've gotten through a lot of books, a lot of podcasts
Yeah.
this year. So awesome. All right, modified some of these favorite activities since becoming a menopausal mom.
Stand-up paddleboarding entered my
Cool.
existence. Yeah, which I just and birding. I do them together. But I still mountain bike. I still do
Yeah.
long, crazy, ridiculous events. But one of the things that I really took up that I think has been transformational is the stand-up paddleboarding because it's
Mhm.
so zen, it's so calming, it's
Yeah.
so beautiful, and I just love it. And I take my binoculars and I look at like green herons and blue herons and
Oh my God.
egrets. Yeah, just makes me really
Where are
happy.
you where are you in the world that you have places that you can go to paddleboard?
I am in Pennsylvania. I'm not actually that. My brother is in Woodbridge, Virginia, so
Okay, yeah.
not probably far from you. So we have a lot of lakes around us. So there's
Mhm.
a lake about a half hour away that's one of the largest man-made lakes, but it's a hotbed for like osprey and eagles and herons,
Yeah.
and yeah, it's really great.
Yeah, no, I'm originally, from Western New York, but, my husband's family, we go up every summer. It's kinda like Northeast Pennsylvania, south of Binghamton, and there's this tiny
Mhm.
little lake that, like, half the people that live on the lake are related to him in some way, shape, or form. And so I'll go out and it's just, like, super calm in the morning, nobody's up, and, some relatives got a paddle board that they left there, and so I'll go out and just kinda chill, and like you said,
Yeah.
just it's zen. I love it.
Yeah,
I love
as
it.
soon as I drift out, I can feel like the
Yeah.
parasympathetics just turn
Yeah.
on. I'm just like, "Oh, this is so
Yeah.
nice." Yeah.
Yeah. I don't like it so much when it gets a little wavy, that's not so much fun. It's a
Yeah,
lot
little
more
waves
work.
are fun. I have friends that went down the river. They're like, "Come with me." I'm like, "This is not actually what I wanted to do. This is
No.
not what this was about. We're going over boulders now. I'm not like I
No.
get this on my bike. I don't need it on my board." But anyway.
No, no, I we had Juliette Surratt on recently, and
Oh,
she
I
was
love
telling me
her.
she's the best, and, we
Yeah.
were talking about all her stuff. I'm like, "No, what you do is not my jam."
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Oh, a hippo will never attack me when I am.
No. No, no, like, what is over by Ohio Pile, I guess, like, Western
Oh, I
Pennsylvania
like
or
it over
whatever.
there. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I did one of those little duck paddle thing, blow up boats, and I about died and smashed my head against a rock. Never again.
Yeah. Fair.
Never again. Alright, one piece of advice for new menopausal moms.
Get help if you need it. I
Mm,
mean, I think that the conversation around hormone therapy has been so fraught, with fear and
mhm,
all kinds of stuff. But if you are feeling like you are really suffering with hormonal symptoms that are making your life even more difficult, whether that be night sweats, hot flashes, unable to sleep, mood, like there are many, 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 many options for you now, like as
yeah,
far as the hormone therapy conversation, and it's largely safe, and there is no need to suffer. Like that is my
yeah,
thing. Like I don't think that everybody needs to be on it or nobody should be on it, but I think that it is a great tool that is accessible and there for you, and you shouldn't be afraid to go. Like there's just no need to suffer. Don't suffer. Life is difficult
yeah.
enough. Do not suffer.
No, I heard you on a podcast I think you did in January, I can't remember, it was, like, maybe some life hack podcast, I can't remember, but you were talking about kind of the polarity that's come with HRT, where people are almost like fear mongering, like if you don't take this, you're going to, have
That's
this
the
and this
bane of
and this
my
and this. And
existence right now.
yeah, but the pendulum always swings on this stuff, and it's
Yeah.
really quite annoying. But to your point, I think understanding what HRT can address, and if you have those symptoms, yes, HRT may be a great option for you,
Yeah.
but there's certain symptoms and certain things that it does not address, and understanding that if you don't have those symptoms, great, that may not be something that you need right
Right.
now. But if you have those symptoms, yes,
Yep.
please talk to somebody. And if they tell you no, suck it up, buttercup, go find somebody else.
Great advice. Yep.
All right. Who's somebody in the menopausal space that we should know about?
Oh boy, there are so many people in the menopausal space.
Who's got your attention right now?
That's a great question because I follow so many people. So who
Yeah.
would I think I would almost need to look it up because I can see their Instagram in my head.
I understand.
Because I follow so many. I mean, there's a lot of people that I really like. I follow Amanda Thebe, I follow Jen Gunter, I follow like sort of all the regular people.
Mhm.
But there's a few right now that are doing what I really enjoy is that they're taking some of the bigger claims that you see just tossed out there when you're speaking of like hormone therapy specifically, like it'll add 10 years to your life, whatever. And they're like, will it? And they dig in and they go,
Yeah.
they look at the
Yep.
actual science that those claims are based off of.
Yep.
And they're like, this is what that real science is. And I really appreciate that because right now, so many people are taking like bits of science based off of like one study from 2011 that was just on this one kind of therapy and just blowing it so out of proportion that there's a lot, again, I'm going to say there's a lot of money to be made and there are people that are looking to make
Yes.
a lot of money. So you just have to
Yes.
really, I think finding those sites that have that kind of balanced information becomes more important than ever. And I will share that with you. I don't know if you do show notes or stuff. It's escaping me right now,
Yeah. No,
but
that'd be great. Yep.
I can share it with you.
No, and that's also a menopausal thing is you're like, I can see the post in my head.
Yeah, when I have 12,000 of them in my head, I'm like, I can picture it. I
No,
can see
I'm the same
logo.
way. I'm like,
Yeah.
I'll find it in about 45 minutes in my head. Yeah, no, for sure. And I think that's also the blessing and the curse of having access to this information and being able to vet information and vet sources. And chances are, if somebody's promising you Kool-Aid and this is all one thing and they're selling you something, you should probably turn and walk the other way. So
Yeah, just always keep skeptical.
good information, good advice for sure. All right, last one. And what does it mean to you to be an active mom in menopause?
Yeah, it just means honestly a more joyful life. I mean, I think that feeling energetic and happy and calm and all of those things are part and parcel to living an active life, especially like engaging with the outdoors, which I like to do a lot. I mean, it's just I set an example for my daughter. My daughter sees what I do. She doesn't do the same things I do, but I see that it has made an impact on her. When she sees me, I'm like, I'm gonna go move my mood now if I'm having a hard day. Like she understands that connection. Like, oh, like I don't have to sit and be in my feelings. I have some agency to get up and like move my feelings, and she's a young woman whose menstrual cycles are like, she's weepy the days before, she feels her hormones a lot. And I'm like, that's great. But you also like, it's given her it gives you, again, it just gives you agency is the best word. Like when you understand it and you can do something about it, like that just makes your life better.
Yeah. No, I think that's a great note to end on for sure. All right. If you want to know more about Selene, you can find her on Instagram at Fit Chick or Feisty Menopause or Hit Play Not Pause podcast. Selene Yeager, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thanks. It was great. I appreciate it.
Did you enjoy the podcast? If so, leave us a 5-star review on iTunes and tell a friend to do the same. Are you a postpartum mom or postpartum pro wanting to know more about getting back to running after baby? Check out all my free goodies on carriepagliano.com. This podcast represents the opinions of Dr. Carrie Pagliano and her guests to the show. The content should not be taken as medical advice and is for entertainment purposes only. Always consult your healthcare professional for any medical questions.